Well, welcome everybody. Welcome to this session, which is part of our Making Global Goals Local Business Roadshow. My name's Jess and I'm the Global Goals Programme Manager here at the UN Global Compact Network UK. Joining me today speaking are Fran and Gary from the Very Group, who will be sharing some of their own experiences getting started with the SDGs. And also on the call is Claire, who is our Global Goals Programme Coordinator, who will be doing some of the back-end work. Claire, if you could get me onto the next slide, that would be fantastic. Brilliant. So to begin our session, I'm going to give us an introduction to the UN Global Compact and the UK network, before I then explore the SDGs and their role in the business agenda. As I mentioned, we're really excited today to have Fran and Gary from the Very Group, who've kindly agreed to join us, and they're going to be sharing a bit of their own stories. Before I then share some of the practical tools that you can use to engage with the SDGs. For the second half of the session, we'll be opening up for questions. We'd like to have an open forum so you can discuss any of your questions or concerns or your own challenges. So please do, while we've got the presentations going on, put your questions in the chat box and we can get them to them in that second half. And then we'll be wrapping up the session to let you know some more about our upcoming events and programmes. While we've got the presentations, we'd be grateful if you could put your microphone on mute. And then right at the end of the session, we can either read out your questions or we can ask you to unmute your mic. If you are having any technical difficulties or got any questions, please feel free to message Claire or myself and we'll try and help you out. We are recording the session, as you can see, so we'll send through the recording and the slides to you all afterwards. So fantastic, let's get started. We are the UN Global Compact, which is the world's largest corporate sustainability initiative. It launched 20 years ago when Kofi Annan was the Secretary General, and today we have over, I think, 11,000 companies all over the world who've made the commitment to our 10 principles to support sustainability, along with another 3,500 or more non-business all types. So that includes NGOs, trade unions, universities, and associations. Next slide, please. So the very essence of the Global Compact are these 10 universal principles which are derived from UN treaties in the areas of human rights, labour, environment and anti-corruption. So this foundation provides a rock-solid basis for any corporate sustainability programme or supplier code of conduct. They are truly universal principles based on the treaties which were ratified by every country around the world. So it's a really powerful statement for any company to be able to point to this as the basis for their work. Next slide, please. So the UN Global Compact Network UK is a local network of UN Global Compact. So we work alongside 68 other local networks and our colleagues in headquarters. Our role is to support all of the companies based in the UK with the commitments that we've made. So we have three main work streams: business and human rights, climate action and global goals, which this series fits in with. I think in a normal year, we've got there on the screen, we do about 30 events, but this year we're probably going to feature maybe 50 or 60, just because we've been able to do a lot more online than we would have done in normal times. We cover a really broad range of themes. So we've got working groups to go deeper into subjects. We've got bigger conferences to raise awareness of some of those challenges that we're addressing. And we've got a few more of those different types of activities there on the screen. Next slide, please. So to join the Global Compact, and if you're not already in an organisation which is a member, I would really encourage you to have a look into it. Your CEO needs to commit to three key pieces. So firstly is to operationalise the Global Compact principles throughout your organisation. Secondly, to report annually on the progress. And finally is to support the wider UN development agenda. And at the moment, that wider UN development agenda is best represented by the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which is what we're here to explore today. So next slide, please. What are the SDGs? So here they are on the screen. And from now until 2030, this is what that wider UN development agenda looks like. It's the plan that was agreed by every member state of the UN. The UN did the biggest consultation ever in arriving at this agenda, and it was agreed unanimously, which is quite a feat. They were passed in 2015, following on from the Millennium Millennium Development Goals, and they apply to every country around the world. So there are 17 goals. Underneath these 17 goals sit 169 targets and 232 indicators to measure progress. The goals are really far-reaching, so they cover things from the environment to social things. You can see poverty and gender equality, through to economy, so decent work and economic growth. The goals are closely interlinked, and the idea is that together they will bring about the future we want, so fighting those inequalities, tackling climate change, and creating a better world. So while it was governments that made the commitment, achieving the goals is going to require support from all members of society, and in particular the business community. Next slide, please. So, and the next one. So to look at why business should care about the SDGs, we've got a bit of a mashup of headlines and images that perhaps look at the more risk side of it. So starting in the top left, you can see our Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who's wearing that little lapel pin, and that's the SDGs wheel. So while you might not get the impression from public statements that governments are actively engaging around the SDGs, they are in fact doing so. They're well aware of this agenda, it's already influencing policy, and we should expect it to do more so going forward. Therefore, it would be imprudent of any company to ignore this agenda and think that it doesn't impact on them. The headline with Mark Carney, corporations told to draw up climate rules or have them imposed. He's actually referring to the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures there, but the idea is applicable. You know, this is the direction that the world is going in. Any notion that engaging on the SDGs is optional is, frankly, illusionary. It might not be mandated by law for now, but there are pressures coming in from various different quarters, creating an expectation that companies are going to engage on this. And you know, the gist of his point here is that if companies don't engage voluntarily, it will be turned on them. Coronavirus has made this more difficult. If we skip down to the right-hand corner, the Shared Responsibility Global Solidarity Report just goes to show that if we'd been making more progress on the SDGs before the COVID crisis hit, our ability to respond to it would have been greatly improved. Making our society and our economies more resilient to cope with those kind of shocks that we're seeing is exactly what's being built into the SDGs. So is it a business issue? The headline above the report there, Uber stripped of London licence due to lack of corporate responsibility. That's just an example from here in the UK, but any company that doesn't give these non-financial concerns as much attention as a more financial issue might deserve is in for a surprise when these issues become financial very quickly, and nothing gets more financial than losing your licence to operate. Strictly speaking, there's the legal license to operate, and there's the notional social license to operate. And the Extinction Rebellion image of people taking to the streets points to the latter. You know, the public has spoken, this is the future they want. And there's a good chance that your competitors are already starting to engage with this to respond to some of those challenges. So taken together, the idea of this slide really is just to convey that there is a degree of risk to companies that ignore this agenda. But now if we go on to the next slide, let's look at the tremendous opportunity in it. So the Business and Sustainable Development Commission convened shortly after the goals were passed, and they did a robust analysis of the potential impact of engaging around the goals. And they found that just by looking at a few of the key sectors that would be affected, the potential for $12 trillion of new business value every year by engaging with this agenda. Next slide, please. So this is a very pro-business agenda. So if we look at the macro level, better educated and more productive workforce is good for business. More fair and just societies is good for business. Climate resilience is good for business. And this is what the SDGs and this agenda seeks to bring about. If we head on to the next slide and look at the benefits at micro level. So I've got some on the screen there. Makes a business more attractive for investors and customers, improves management of the supply chain, access to public procurement and public investment, Improves competitiveness in hiring. You know, it's proven many times over the years that the best and the brightest get to choose where they work. And what we're seeing now is that people want to work in organisations that demonstrate a purpose beyond just profit. The bottom there says social license to operate and public opinion, and we've already touched on that. So if I head to the next slide, thanks. And going back to COVID-19, which is obviously the huge context that we're all operating in at the moment. I mentioned the missed opportunity in not making more progress towards the goals and how that would have left us better prepared for the pandemic if we'd have been working towards them. And that applies to businesses too. So now forewarned, we need to catch up. And a couple of months ago, we coordinated a letter with 150 other businesses calling on the UK government to align their recovery strategies with the SDGs. You know, it's not enough that we just make a green recovery. Obviously, that's critically important, but we need that balance between social, environmental, and economic, and that's what the SDGs bring. This is the best way that government can ensure policy coherence. And going forward, this is the best way that businesses can achieve that too, and the best way that you can create a resilient, a sustainable, and a strong business. So that leads us very nicely onto our guest speakers for today, Fran and Gary. They're joining us from the Very Group, and they're going to be sharing a little bit about their own sustainability journey. As I mentioned, do put your questions in the chat box and we'll get onto those at the end of presentations. But for now, over to you two.
Thanks very much. So I'll start. So I'm Gary Carney. I work in the corporate social responsibility team at Very. We are, for those of you that don't know, an online retailer and integrated financial services provider. Up until about 18 months ago, CSR at Very was seen very much something that is focused on supply chain. So its connectivity to the wider business wasn't really existent. But our CEO recognised the need to develop a world-class CSR programme that aligned to the broader business strategy and also created added value for customers, colleagues and partners. So to do that, we looked to the Sustainable Development Goals. We focused on goals that, whilst all 17 are interconnected and all play an important role, we focused on 6 that we thought we could have the most impact on. So those 6 for us were number 3, good health and well-being, 5, gender equality, 8, decent work and economic growth, 10, reduce the inequalities, 12, responsible consumption and production, and 13, climate action. We found them as a useful tool to be able to wrap around within our own internal pillars that we created to be responsible in our communities, to our planet, to our people, and to our customers. The benefits that it brought us was framing the strategy around the SDGs led to enhanced understanding and engagement from the board and senior leadership, and it really helped us shift the way CSR was looked at within our business to show that it's not just a nice to have that might sit somewhere within retail, but has a broader impact on wider business operations. It's also enabled greater engagement with us from a communication and marketing perspective, so we can start speaking not only internally but externally to our customers as well on the impact that we're having and how they can play their parts in implementing the Sustainable Development Goals. One of the ambitions that we had was to try and make CSR a lot more visible and a lot more important across the business. So I think as was mentioned earlier, we want to get it to that same sort of level as when we're talking about finance. When we talk about everything, we should also be mentioning the impact on sustainability. So what might be seen as a very small win, externally, internally, it will be a big thing for us next month when our presence in the company's annual report increases from what was historically 1 page with very little detail on what CSR means to us to, depending on the format, between 6 to 10 pages of sustainability information and the importance that the business places on it. We were asked to look at what problems or barriers that we faced when implementing a new strategy. And to be honest, we didn't we didn't have problems with the Sustainable Development Goals. We almost used them as something that we've got in our back pocket, if you like. So where we've tried to engage different areas of the business, be that in things like sourcing different renewable energy, or whether it's looking at different finance positions, the Sustainable Development Goals was really useful to us in that when we were presenting to different areas of the business, we weren't presenting a project that was a CSR project or a nice to have. It was enabling us to explain to them that we want to play our part in a global initiative. As I said, it's enabled us to take that view and broaden the scope of what we impact on. So we've gone from entirely focused on supply chain to looking at the whole business and the wider operations and what our footprint is. But that's not to say we're any less focused on what we do in supply chain. So I'll pass over to Francesca now, who will talk a little bit more about supply chain and how the SDGs have played into them.
Thanks, Gary. So yeah, I'm Francesca Reformati. I look after supply chain and product CSR initiatives at the Very Group. I guess, as Gary mentioned, supply chain at Very has been a bit more advanced on the CSR front than it has on other areas. So what I'll do is just speak to some of our learnings that we took from integrating the SDGs into our work, especially into an existing offering that we had within the business, and try and share some things that we think might be worth bearing in mind if you're embarking on this journey yourselves. So I guess the first thing, and it sounds like an easy one, but actually it's definitely worth doing, is just assessing what you have on the table already. Because once you've decided on your SDGs and you've got a vision of where your business wants to go, for us, we found that some of the work we were already doing, particularly on projects with women and girls in India or on worker wellbeing in Bangladesh, they aligned quite nicely and almost gave us more opportunity to design and implement something more effective by looking to the SDGs for guidance. Particularly the SDG 3 and SDG 5 for us. So yeah, definitely have a look what's on the table and look at using the SDGs as a bit of a template and tracing for work going forward. The other thing that we really identified we needed to do some work on was the education piece on the SDGs, particularly in our local teams. Just to ensure that they could understand the strategy as well as we could here. Obviously, as head office, we typically design the vision and we roll that out across the business. But for the local teams, we wanted to bring them on that journey, and so they can start to identify opportunities with a local and a global lens as to how to really start contributing in an effective way. So that training was key, and ensuring that commitment was there just to take that vision into actual implementation. And then the other big thing, which we're still grappling with and still working on across, whether that's our own ops or whether that's supply chain, is having a clear monitoring and evaluation tool. So we can really have visibility on what we're achieving, the data that we're able to collect, make sure we're tracking against our planned objectives, and that the work is still relevant in the local context. Obviously, our projects run through phases, often by financial years. So at the end of each year, it's really important that we're doing postmortems to make sure that the work is still contributing to the goals. And that vision we had is still relevant to the work we're designing. So there are three big learnings. I don't know, Gary, if you'd add anything to that, but for us, we're still on the journey, we're still learning, but there are three big things that we'd recommend each business take forward.
No, I don't think so. I think that covers everything. Like I say, I think from the experiences that we've had, they've enabled us as a conversation starter, and then also with the reputational benefits that they've got to really show the importance of whatever it is that we're trying to implement.
That was brilliant. Thank you both for sharing, and I'm sure we're going to have lots of questions. I've got a couple that have already come to mind, but really helpful to kind of hear where you've got so far in your own journey and some of those learnings that you've got too. So as I mentioned, do put your questions in the chat box for Fran and Gary, and we will get to those shortly. I suppose the next question which a lot of people are going to be asking is, where do you actually start? What can you actually do? So if we go on to the next slide, I'm just going to talk you through a couple of the toolkits which we've developed, which are free and available for you to use. So on to the next one, please, Claire. So the first one is the SDG Compass, which is a guide that provides guidance for companies on how you can align your strategies, as well as measure and manage your contributions to the realization of the SDGs. So there are 5 steps, as you can see on the screen. The first one is understanding the SDGs, and we've done a little bit of that today, but there's more about it in the guide. And then you go on to this kind of loop, and the idea is that you are continuously on that journey, as Fran and Gary said. So step 2 looks at how you define priorities. So mapping your value chain and working out your impact areas. You know, there are 17 goals, and that can be quite overwhelming. And as you've heard from the very group, they've picked 5 or 6 priority SDGs that they're going to work on. So that looks at step 2. Step 3 is all about setting goals. So how you actually define your scope and kind of setting your level of ambition. Step 4 is then about integrating that throughout the organization, really embedding it across all of the different functions and operations. And step 5 then looks at reporting and communicating, and in particular effective reporting and communicating on your performance on the SDGs. And as I mentioned, it's in a loop there, so the idea then is that once you've done that reporting, communicating, perhaps you're then either redefining your priorities, or maybe it would be setting new goals for the next year, or the next goal setting target period ahead. So I mentioned that one's free and online, really fantastic tool that you can look at today and get started with. I've got a couple more to go through, so if we go to the next slide. The next one that I want to discuss is relatively new, and it's called the SDG Action Manager. And it's a web-based self-assessment tool. So the idea is that you create a company profile and answer some basic questions about the kind of general size and nature of your company. And then there are questions under each SDG. So by answering those initial questions, the tool will suggest which questions might be most relevant for your company, but you are of course welcome to answer them all if you like. And the idea is that in answering all of these different questions, you'll then be able to build up a better picture of where your strengths are and where your weaknesses are, maybe some of your risk areas. You can use the tool to set your own targets and track progress over the time. You can invite colleagues to join you in on the tool. So if you'd like to join, ask your colleagues from procurement to answer the questions around goal 12, or maybe it's your colleagues from HR to answer the questions around gender equality or good health. Then you can get everybody to collaborate in on the same tool, and also to be able to see the targets that you've set and progress. And there's benchmarks and other guides available on that tool. So another free one that I definitely recommend checking out after this webinar. And then the third one, if we could go on to the next slide, Claire, fantastic. The third one is called the Blueprint for Business Leadership on the SDGs. And I suppose this is then looking at that next stage. So once you've already identified what your priority areas are, or the particular SDGs that you want to focus on, this blueprint goes into a lot of great information, and you have picked out a few screenshots from it there. So it will discuss how working on that particular goal is then connected with the other goals. It asks sets 5 leadership qualities and asks some questions to start to get you to really critically kind of analyze what your actions are doing in terms of that goal. And it suggests a number of different business actions. So you can see at the bottom, I've pulled it from goal 5, which is gender equality. And it suggests some business actions that you can be doing within your organization. So we've got something on supporting women's employment, developing products that empower women, preventing gender-based discrimination. And under each of those business actions, set some more great guidance and some case studies of what other organizations have done in the past. So those are just 3 of the tools which I think together form a really good starting point for any organization wanting to engage with the SDGs and wanting to start this conversation or get onto the next steps within your company. That I think leads us up to the last slide. Is that right, Claire? Yeah, fantastic. So that's the end of the kind of formal part of the presentation. We've now got about 20 or 25 minutes or so to open up the floor to your questions. And I can see that there's a few that have started coming in on the chat. We've got a first question from Ricardo, who asks, is the UK network open to small consultancy companies' participation? And the answer is yes. The UN Global Compact is open to businesses of all size. There's lots more information on our website, but if you would like to have a conversation about us or ask us any questions kind of particularly to do with your membership, then feel free to send us an email and we can send you some more information about that. Hopefully that answers your question, Ricardo. I can see you nodding. Yep, thumbs up, brilliant. So we've got a next question from Melanie, who the question is for Fran and Gary. Which stakeholders did you engage in order to decide upon the SDGs that you've taken forward, and how long did the process of agreeing them take? Which is great, because that was the question that I was going to ask. So I'll hand it over to you two to answer that question.
So in terms of the stakeholders that we engaged, it was an ongoing conversation across different departments internally. So starting with the CEO and seeing where the things that he was passionate about and where he saw the very group making the most impact. But then also just looking at the goals themselves and saying, well, realistically, what can we have the most impact on? So we know, for example, that we can responsible consumption and production. A big part of our business is the fashion side of it. So that's clearly something that is going to really play into what we do. And it's going to be easy to translate that message to customers and colleagues. It might be a little bit more difficult to explain how we're going to support life below water. So it was just looking at different ones and saying, well, what's the most relevant for us? In terms of how long it took to get everything agreed, it wasn't all done in a day. It was certainly a few months. I think it was probably the best part of 4 to 6 months from saying, this is what we want to achieve, go away and build something. And it was back and forth. Version 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 up to about 26 about what the strategy looked like. In the end, they had to get board approval, it had to get approval from our shareholders. So it wasn't a straightforward process, but the time that was spent on it was, in the end, was worthwhile.
That's brilliant, thanks, Gary. And I'm not going to let you go because I can see there's lots more questions coming in for you. So we've got another question from Joanna, who asked, can you expand on what tools you found most useful in monitoring and evaluating your progress?
So far, it really depends on which aspect we're focusing in on. So some of our goals, the strategy that we've got has broader goals similar to the SDGs, and then breaks up into smaller targets. So we wanted to switch to renewable energy. We know our carbon footprints from the electricity, for example, that we were already purchasing. So that was a case of working with our existing suppliers to say, what's our carbon footprint now? And then as of this month, we've switched to renewable electricity anyway. So that's something that's quite easy to track. Things like if we're looking at well-being side, if we're looking at training courses for people in supply chain, the tools that we've used there is measurement of how many people have been on courses, and then what is the impact afterwards. So what were the benefits that people in the supply chain actually seen? So it's probably a bit of a non-answer, but it just depends on what bit we were looking at.
No, I think that's brilliant. And I should have mentioned, actually, feel free, any of the people asking questions, to unmute yourself if that answers your question, or if you wanted to ask a follow-up question. If not, we've got another question for you, Gary, from Fernando, who's asked, for the SDGs that you selected, Are you looking mainly at the higher level term, so for example, responsible production and consumption, or are you selecting specific indicators and sub-targets listed within those SDGs?
So we started from a point of the higher level, and then seeing within that how that breaks down. So a mixture of both, but saying what are the bits within our business that will add up to us playing our part in implementing that goal.
Brilliant. And we've got another question from Michelle, who's asking about what tracking tools do you use, but I think that's probably been covered in your previous ones. And actually another one, I'm just going to carry on going with the questions for you, Gary, because I think you've probably got more interesting things to say. From Nick, who's asked, do you use SDG activities in your PR and marketing? Which I think is a great question from Nick.
Well, it is. It's very topical. 18 months ago, as I said earlier, if we'd have talked about CSR within our PR and marketing, it wouldn't have happened as a result of this and the journey that we're on. We've now, in the past 6 months, we've now got more of a space on our corporate website. We will have a space on a customer-facing page on our main website. So that's for very.co.uk and for Littlewoods as well. And in the last couple of months, the business has actually appointed a new marketing agency. And again, we were invited and involved in all of the marketing meetings to have our perspective, because it's going to form a key part of our communications moving forward. So to date, there's probably not been that much that's gone out there, but it's something that's in the works, and there'll be a noticeable difference.
Brilliant, thanks for that, Gary. And I'll give you a little bit of a rest while I answer a question from Annika, who's asked, how do the SDG Ambition 10 business benchmarks fit into this? So it's a great question, and I'll give a little bit of context to that for anyone who's not come across it yet on the call. So the SDGs have been obviously in play for 5 years, and as the kind of UN Global Compact, we have been doing a little bit of research into how companies have been progressing towards the goals, and unfortunately it's not been at kind of the scale that we need to be able to achieve them by 2030. Obviously we've just got 10 years left. So the Global Compact have done a little bit of work, or actually it's quite a large piece of work this year, in developing something called the SDG Ambition Business Benchmarks. And the idea is that they've come up with, at the moment, 10 benchmarks which are universal, and the idea is that hopefully all businesses can align their goals or their targets to these benchmarks, and they've been designed specifically to be able to achieve the SDGs within 10 years, so by 2030. And there's been a lot of consultation to work out whether these business benchmarks are suitable for businesses to be able to achieve the SDGs, whether they're suitable for industries, whether they're realistic, whether they're ambitious enough. And they're kind of, well, at the global level, finalising these business benchmarks, and they will be released, I think, later this month, with the idea that there are still some more areas that we want to look into, so adding and kind of evolving these benchmarks over the next couple of years. So we're actually going to be doing a programme called SDG Ambition, which will be starting in the autumn and launching properly in January, which will be helping businesses who have perhaps at that next stage. So they've already been looking at the SDGs, already been looking at how they can align their goals and targets with them, but really looking at how they can raise their level of ambition and ensure that their targets that they're setting do achieve the SDGs by 2030. So it's going to be a 6-month accelerator program running from January to June next year, and we'll take you from that process of defining which one of those benchmarks are suitable for your business and are going to be your priorities. Again, working out what goals you want to set, and then integrating it throughout your business, with the idea at the end of 6 months you'll be having some goals that align to the benchmarks, a clear action plan for being able to integrate those across the business, and then a way to actually track your progress and kind of do that publicly. So that's the program that we're going to be doing to support companies who are looking to do those next levels of kind of raising their ambition. And I'll go back to the question which Annika asked, which is, should we just be focusing on those 10 benchmarks? And I suppose the question really is depends on where your business is at in the sustainability journey. For some businesses that would definitely make sense. It might even make sense for those of you that are just starting to look at how you align some of your own goals to the SDGs, and they might be a very easy way to align what you're doing to what kind of the Global Compact is recommending on that global level. They are ambitious, so I suppose for companies that are really just getting started, just starting to learn what the SDGs might mean for your business, then it might not be that you're quite at that stage yet to start putting those into action. And I think I was kind of stress again what Gary and Fran said, and then what they've done in their own journey is really looking at where you can have an impact. And I know that there's been another question, it's disappeared there somewhere, who was asking about small businesses and you know, being able to find the resources and the time to kind of sign up to the SDGs. I think the key thing really is to look at your impact, look where you've got resources, and look where you can actually be smart in the way that you're aligning your goals to the SDGs. Hopefully that's kind of answered the question, but feel free, those Annika and whoever else is asking those questions, feel free to unmute yourself and dive in there if there was something else that you wanted to know. But I think those would be the key.
Jessica, that was my question.
Hi.
Yeah, no, it's just FSB, like we represent very small businesses, and I suppose sometimes, particularly at the minute when people are really trying to recover and get over COVID, and here in Northern Ireland look towards the impact of Brexit. So sometimes the likes of the sustainable goals may go down the pecking order of priority, and again, if you're talking about micro businesses, self-employed, they're kind of going, I don't have time to actually look at this. So it's maybe just the the very simple steps that they can take that may not necessarily be able to sign up to a whole program, but things they could be doing just to improve themselves.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think I'd probably lean back on the couple of tools that I shared at the end of the presentation there. So the SDG Compass, which is a great guide, and I think the idea is that you can hop in and out and work out maybe which stage you're at, or maybe which stage might be useful for you. And I suppose the SDG Action Manager as well. Obviously it does take some time going in there and answering all the questions, but I think you don't have to answer obviously all of them, and it will, if you're a small business, it will kind of guide you towards the select questions which it suggests that might be suitable for you to answer. But I think that really would help to kind of build up a little bit of a picture again of where your strengths are, and where it looks like you might be able to be making the most impact, and then some of the areas which you're maybe slightly falling short of, or where you can really put some work in. And through the SDG Action Manager, through the questions, it will lead you on to some suggested actions, or at least some suggested goals that you can be working towards. So it does take a little bit of time to get through, but I suggest if you've got a day or two that you can set aside, that might be an easy way to then identify very quickly some of those quick wins and some of those smaller actions that you can actually dedicate some time to. And it might be that the work that you're doing anyway, especially if you're looking into sustainability or looking into corporate responsibility, it might be that the work you're doing anyway is already aligning with that, and you're just not aware about where that kind of crossover is. So it's a useful tool in being able to understand that. I don't know, Fran or Gary, if you wanted to chip in and say anything. I think you've probably got a slightly larger team that's able to work on it, but if you've got anything that you wanted to add.
Oh, I don't think so. I think from our perspective, the CSR team is quite small. So the message that we've been trying to put out is that we're there to facilitate other areas of the business to try and engage on them. And the approach that we've taken is to use the SDGs as a way of finding something that's more relevant for that particular area. So particularly if we look at the likes of the commercial finance team, who might not have previously been that engaged in our world, if we start talking about sustainable finance and things like that linked to the SDGs, then suddenly we get a lot more engagement.
Yeah, I'm sorry to jump in. I'd probably add to that as well. Within the product side of things, and our switch to sustainable fibres and circularity, we are a small team, so actually getting the buyers involved and making it part of their performance and their KPIs has been part of the journey as well. So definitely pulling on all your resources, probably a good idea, and making it as much of BAU as possible.
That's brilliant. And I've got there's a follow-up question from Ricardo, which I think links to that. But the question is, did you have any feedback from the board or stakeholders relating to the adoption of the SDGs?
Yeah, similar to what we just said about how we engage different areas of the business. It made it easier to have that conversation. So it wasn't just seen as a nice to have. It's not just a CSR project that's going on somewhere in the business. It's finding your place in a global initiative.
Brilliant, thanks. And we've got a question from Stephen, who's asked, what is being planned by the UN for beyond 2030? Which is a great question. I don't know. I think we're really, we've called this the Decade of Action this year, obviously, because we've got 10 years left to achieve the SDGs, and that's our main priorities at the moment. I couldn't tell you what the current discussions are in the UN or whether they've even started that process. I imagine we'll be a few more years away before the conversations start about what's next, and hopefully at that stage we'll be a little bit more advanced in where we're getting with the SDGs. But I say watch this space, Stephen. And another question from Stephen there, does a tool or data exist which looks to provide a global view as to the progress towards the SDGs and whether they can be achieved by 2030? That's another really good question. And I think there are things, I'm looking at Claire now, whether you've come across any that you can particularly name. I know that there is a lot of data out there which talks about progress, and I can't think of what the websites would be offhand, but I can follow up with you and share. There's something called the Voluntary National Review, which a lot of countries are doing, and the UK did it a couple of years ago, if I'm right. And I think I shared a picture of it on one of my slides, and that is looking exactly at the UK's progress towards the SDGs. And that's available online. I think we've got a page on our website which is SDG Tools and Resources, and there's links to it there. So you can have a look at there and see where we're at in terms of the national progress. Office for National Statistics have also been doing a lot of work in the area, but I think your question was on the global level. So I'll get back to you, Stephen, but there is definitely websites out there where it can tell you where we've got so far, and there'll definitely be a lot around it this month. Next Friday is the 5th anniversary of the adoption of the SDGs, so there's a lot of noise, a lot of events going on around the goals at the moment. So definitely there'll be lots of things out there that you can have a look at. Okay.
I just wanted to pipe in with one question, Jess, there for the very group.
Oh, go for it.
I guess you mentioned that your customers they value sustainability, but are they aware of the SDGs, your end customers?
So that's one of the bits that we want to get to in terms of our communication, is to start engaging more on the SDGs. With the stage that we're at in terms of communicating sustainability to our customers is very early. So we're currently working with marketing teams and customer research to say at what level of understanding is our customer in relation to sustainability, because we don't want to go out there with something that's heavily scientific based. If people aren't already engaged on it, then it's not going to land. So it will be, it's likely to be small steps for us on really simplifying sustainability almost down to this is good and this is bad, and then using the Sustainable Development Goals at the same time to say, and this is where we fit in the wider spectrum.
Great, thanks very much. Brilliant.
And I'm just going to take a last question from Nick, who's asked, do you see any companies supporting SDG activities that are not related to their own business? So more kind of philanthropy, or kind of sponsorship of SDG products? Yes, the answer is yes, absolutely, Nick. There's lots of companies that we're seeing that perhaps had maybe more community engagement projects, or maybe what's traditionally thought of as the kind of outreach or CSR projects going on that relate to the SDGs and not necessarily something that their own business or their operations are involved in. It's really broad across the spectrum what people are doing. There's loads of fantastic case studies out there, but yes, essentially we're seeing companies do a lot of things outside of their core business operations, and on the flip side, a lot of businesses that are focusing more on the impact that they can make through their own operations or functions. So both really. And I think that's led us to the end of our questions, but it's definitely led us to the end of the time. But if anybody's got any other questions, feel free to send them through by email, and we'd be happy to answer them. I've just got a couple of last slides to present, really looking at some of our upcoming events and what's coming next. So this webinar has been part of our Making Global Goals Local Business Roadshow. Usually we travel around the country, but this time we've been able to do it from the comfort of our flat. So we will be doing a repeat of this webinar in November. We'll be inviting a different company to come and join us and share their own experiences. But if you've got colleagues or stakeholders or anybody who you think would benefit from it or would be interested, then we'll send you the slides, and there'll be a link there that you can sign up to join us in November. We're also going to be doing some deep dives into some specific SDGs. So currently we're having conversations around Goal 5, gender equality, Goal 10, reduced inequality, Goal 13, climate action, and that's going to be a really big focus for work generally, definitely in November, as we're going to be doing a lot of events in place of what would have been COP26. So all of our events are on our webpage. We've got a couple of series that we've highlighted there on our screen. The one about business action for women, peace and security. Fantastic series that's just started. We've also just launched our Black Lives Matter and Business series, which is a 6-part series. So we've just had the first one, which was all about storytelling. I think we had about 350 people join us and loads of fantastic speakers and questions for it. So if that's something that your organisation is looking at, or just something that you're interested in, then do come and join us for the rest of the five sessions, which will be looking at things from recruitment to changing corporate culture, and we've got a really high level panel that will be ending on our last session. So that's just a glimpse of some of the upcoming events, but as I mentioned, they're all available on our website. I've also mentioned, if we go on to the next slide, Claire, I've already mentioned our SDG Ambition programme, but again, it's a 6-month accelerator programme, which will really help companies who are looking at that next stage of raising level of ambition, and really aligning your business strategies to the SDGs, and to significantly increase the positive impact you can have on them. So it's going to be a mixture of global sessions and local workshops. It is going to be delivered globally all around the world, so loads of different companies that will be participating, and we'll be kicking off some onboarding activities later this year with a full program starting in January. So if that's something that is going to be of interest to your organisation, do have a look at the information online or get in touch with Claire and I at the end of the session, and we can provide some more information about that. So I think the only thing for me to do is to thank our fantastic speakers, Fran and Gary. It was really wonderful having you join us today and hearing all your insights and picking your brains with all those questions. So thanks for being able to answer all of those. And I'd also like to thank our sponsors, Relics Aviva and N Brown Group, who have sponsored this fantastic series.